I could just ask folks to get comfortable, and I think you'll enjoy. We've got some very interesting people to present awards to today. The first award is the Rebecca Rice Award, and I've been asked to read this verbatim. It recognizes alumni of Antioch College who, by their actions, achievements, and leadership, have distinguished themselves and their alma mater. It is given to persons who have excelled in their vocation or field of study. The award is named for the first female trustee, Rebecca Rice, and longtime faculty member of Antioch College. I have the privilege of introducing the Rebecca Rice Award winner for this year, Laurence, please call me Larry, Leamer. Larry is an author, he's a writer. He has been a journalist, he writes nonfiction primarily, he has done some fiction, and if I predict that you will want to see and hear more of Larry, you can do that. He has been a frequent guest on C-SPAN, and if you go to the internet and look him up, you can find him talking about his various books. I've read 2 of his books. In fact, I read the first book of Larry's that I read. The Price of Justice. But that wasn't his first book. He's written several New York Times bestseller. His book, The Kennedy Women, went to number 2 on the New York Times list. He followed that with Kennedy Men. Larry has credited, when I saw him on C-SPAN, he's credited his Antioch experience as in the co-op program and the Year Abroad as being good background for a writer. And I think it is, the diverse experiences and education we get allows you to delve into everything. And Larry has written about a number of fascinating people and places. And that's what a writer does. He puts words on paper so that we can sit on our easy chair and be transported to the places and meet the people that Larry has found so interesting over the years. And they are fascinating and interesting people and places. Larry served in the Peace Corps. He worked in Nepal. He was 2 days walk from a hard road, or for any kind of road, probably not hard, probably a dirt road of some sort. He has worked in a coal mine. I'm from West Virginia, and I picked up his book published a few years ago, The Price of Justice. It's about a coal baron named Don Blankenship. And the book is primarily about Mr. Blankenship's successful attempt to get rid of one West Virginia Supreme Court justice and install another one, so that when his case, or his company's case, came up before the West Virginia Supreme Court, guess who won? Mr. Blankenship and his company. The United States Supreme Court heard an appeal of that. It's very rare to hear an appeal about how state courts are run or constituted. The United States Supreme Court reversed that decision and said that chosen justice should not have been on the panel. After the book was published, Mr. Blankenship went on trial and was convicted. He served a year in prison for conspiracy to violate mine safety laws. They showed that Mr. Blankenship cared much more about coal production and money than he did about the life and safety of the miners who worked there. He was not convicted of a crime, but the jury more or less found him, and finding him guilty of conspiracy to violate the safety laws, they had in mind the fact that 28 miners died in an explosion in one of Mr. Blankenship's mines. Blankenship had a can of root beer on his desk, and that was the motto of the company. It was Dad's root beer. Do as Dad says. So I recommend that. His latest book, which I've also read, is Mar-a-Lago. And it's about how our president came to buy it. He ended up paying about $3,000 cash out of his pocket at the closing. It had paid recording fees. And it tells why he bought it, what he did with it, and why he loves to be there now. I suggest anybody who's on the fence about how they feel about the president, take a look, and I think you can read it. That part is, or if you want to break up your reading the Mueller report, you can dive into this. So I present to you Larry Leamer.
Thank you. When I arrived yesterday, I walked over to get my credentials, and I walked across the lawn, and I see this distinguished-looking couple walking toward me. I wasn't sure where I was headed. I needed some directions. And I walked up, and I saw the guy already had his name tag, and it said J. Tuck 68. And I remembered his name because he's supposed to give a talk, right? J. Tuck 68. And I put up my hand and said, Larry Leamer 64, and he said, J. Tuck, I'm 73. So that was my introduction to this weekend. In 1906, William James gave a speech at Stanford University that became a celebrated essay that I'm sure many of you know called The Moral Equivalent to Peace. In it he argued that men, and he meant male sex, for thousands of years had achieved their manhood by fighting, by going out into wars and becoming men. In Shakespeare's words, seeking the bubble's reputation in the cannon's mouth. And James argued that we didn't have to do this by war, that we could do this by peace. We could do it fighting with the same strength and diligence to do good in the world. That to me is what Antioch is all about. You know, that's why we came here. It's not why I came here. I don't know why I came here. I was totally alienated from my mother. Parents, I said, why didn't we go and visit this place before? And my mother said, well, because you wouldn't be seen with us. So in high school, I was a kind of nerdy kid in high school, and finally as a senior, I got to lead the senior play. And the director, was my class, Vicky Coolidge, became my girlfriend. And I decided to go off to college with her. My mother was not happy with this idea. And we both applied to Antioch, because she was admitted. And Vicky's parents owned Lou and John's Soup to Nuts on the Vessel Highway. And they lived behind the store. And there were these big Russians. And Lou had a big tattoo on her arm. And always had dressed sleevelessly. She'd show off her tattoo. Believe me, it wasn't a time when women had tattoos on their arm. And so they agreed to take us to Antioch. And we got in the big red Lou and John Soup to Nuts van. I knew nothing about Antioch. So I went to Robert Hall, the famous math clothier, and got a suit. So we showed up in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and in the stoop of the student union, and all these guys are out there. They're just sitting out there because they want to know what the freshman women are going to looking like. So they're waiting for they want to see the new group coming in, and their sandals and their beards and everything. And we show up, and here's this woman with a tattoo on her arm, the freshman in his suit, and a Lou and John Soup to Nuts. Antioch had never seen anything so strange. So that was my introduction. My first co-op job was at Rand McDowell in New York. Remember years ago when you want to go on a trip, you could write into oil companies, and they'd send you back a map showing you how to travel and stuff. So Rand McDowell did that. So there were 7 Antioch students that were there, and 6 of them, they were red diaper babies. They were from New York. Their parents had been communists or far leftists, and they'd done well, and they were hanging together. And on the weekends, they would go out to Westport, Connecticut, on the beach. They had a fire, and I swear to God, Pete Seeger would come, and they'd do folk songs. And I wasn't invited. I was this kid from upstate New York. I was a little more centrist in my politics. I didn't get invited. And I wanted more than anything to get out there and see Pete Seeger. Well, Nelson Rockefeller had an air raid drill for the entire state. And they decided they were going to protest it. Well, I figured I'll protest too, and I'll get to see Pete Seeger because I'll be one of them. So I got to do this protest, and it's like 1 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. We're at 8th Avenue and 14th Street. We come down in the corner. 2 of them take one corner. 2 of them take the second corner. 2 of them take the third corner. I'm on the corner by myself, terrified, just standing there. And everybody else is leading in the buildings, like, commie, faggot, screaming all those names at us. And finally, then it was called a paddy wagon. It's not called that anymore. But it came roaring down the street, stopped, took 2 of them off, put them in the back, and started zooming up. Then another wagon came, took 2 more. And then the third one came and took 2 more, and I'm standing there by myself. I said, enough of this. And I went to join the rest of the crowd. And I never got to see Pete Seeger. I came back, and then the great tragedy in my life, young life, took place. Vicki broke up with me, and for Artie Frankel. She fell in love with Artie Frankel, who was going to be a doctor. I was devastated. That summer, I had one course on Thomas Jefferson. There was no exam. It was just an essay. I could hardly move. And I turned in this essay, and Professor McCleary, who was a wonderful professor, called me in and said, Larry, I thought you were fairly smart, but this is kind of pathetic. It's dreadful. I would give you an F, but you have one brilliant idea. You said, Thomas Jefferson, all my years, grammatically is not right, but do you mean this? I said, yes, of course what I mean. And he said, I'm giving you a B. And he gave me back that paper, and I walked back across the campus. What the hell is he talking about? I had forgotten to submit page 8. He read from the bottom of page 7 to the top of page 9. That was my brilliant idea. So that was Antioch. I was a history major, and Louis Filler, the magnificent Louis Filler, author of Crusaders to American Liberalism, was my advisor. There were two great professors in history. Roger Williams. Roger Williams was this kind of somewhat arrogant, austere, snobbish man, a professor of European history, equally good professor. One day I'm sitting in class, it's the first day of the semester, I'm sitting there in 19th century European history, Roger Williams' class. We first start, there's a knock on the door, and there's this freshman standing there. He looks up at Professor Williams and says, is this American civilization? And Williams says, yes, it is, but I think you're looking for Professor Filler's class across the hall. So that was Roger Williams. I worked in a factory in France, I came back, and then I got into this kind of artistic set at Antioch. There were like 7 or 8 of us, we had our table in the cafeteria, we didn't talk to anybody else. Steve Pedro Engel was the head of this group. He was this kind of short, this strange kind of craggy face. He was a playwright. He was brilliant. He was the guy who was going to be the most brilliant playwright of our age. And my other close friend was Bob Watson. He was my freshman roommate. He, like my father, had been a professor at the University of Chicago, and and we were very, very close. And we were in this group. Pedro graduated in '63, went out to San Francisco, and he wrote me letters saying how why I should come out when I graduated. And when I didn't, I remember him writing letters saying, you're sort of weak-kneed, you're kind of cowardly, you're not going to have a daring life, what are you going to do with your things? Well, I joined the Peace Corps and went to Nepal. Spent 2 years, I was in a very remote place, way up in the mountains. One summer, sent a 500-mile hike all the way across the country. The only other foreigner, outsider there was Sir Edmund Hillary up near Everest. And I came back and I got a fellowship, a Ford Fellowship in International Development at the University of Oregon. I came back and visited my parents in upstate New York. My father taught at Harper College then. And I came to New York to see Bob and Pedro. They had become drug addicts. They had become methadone addicts in that time. Bob had had a big fellowship at the University of Chicago in psychology. He dropped out. He was working as a social worker in New York, and but he had a very bad habit. And Pedro had a very bad habit too. I spent the first night with Pedro, and the second night we went with Bob, and the second night we went over to see Pedro. He was on the west side of Manhattan, on 75th Street. He was living with a bunch of burglars. They were burglars. They were all addicts and they were burglars. And I'm sitting there with these people, and Pedro asked me, did I want to shoot up? Well, the last thing in the world I was interested in that. But these are my friends. I had this big fellowship, but I didn't want to. Pedro was supposed to be a genius. I didn't want to feel superior to him or something. So I said, okay, I didn't know what I was doing. And he shot me up, and I'm just sitting here like electric flow coming through. I don't know what's happening. I can hardly move. And after about 10 minutes, Bob realized something was wrong. He gets me up, he takes me up into the bathroom, puts cold water in the bathtub, and I'm okay. What Pedro had done, he'd shot me up with a speedball of heroin and methadone. And he basically had overdosed me. He'd given me so much that I could have died. Okay? He wanted to do that, I think because he wanted to have control of me again, okay? In the old way. I thought of that so often. What if I died? My parents, here I get this big fellowship, I was a troubled youth, and here I'm going, I come to New York, and a day later I'm dead in a bunch of burglars on the west side of Manhattan. My parents never would have come back from that. And so I remember that, and I blamed Antioch for that, okay? No, I did. I blamed Antioch for setting up the kind of situation that we took all those drugs in college. For years I wanted nothing to do with Antioch. When I got this award, I began thinking about that, realizing how misguided it was. I mean, William James was right. This journey we're on, we have the challenge. It's our responsibility what we do with our life. It wasn't Antioch's fault. It wasn't Antioch's fault at all. So that's another reason why I'm so glad to be here today, to get back and to realize the greatness of this place, the uniqueness in America, in the whole world, what I hope it can come back to. I didn't like studying international development at the University of Oregon. In the fall of '67, I took a course in magazine writing. And again, what you learn from Antioch is you can do whatever you want to do, just do it. And so I talked my way on George Wallace's plane when he took his first trip in the West, spent 4 days with him, submitted an article to the New Republic. They purchased it. A national student magazine had me do interviews with the Democratic presidential candidates. I got a big fellowship to Columbia University School of Journalism. I ended up second. I loved it. I was focused now. I was second in my class. I had job offers from the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and Newsweek. I unfortunately took Newsweek, which was a disaster. After a year, they fired me. I left. I wrote my first book. I ran for the 20th Century Fund about the underground press and youth culture. I worked with the Liberation News Service, the Radical News Service. I worked with them for a while. I traveled all around the country. I wrote that book. I read Nighttime Comes to the Cumberlands, Harry Covell's classic book up in Eastern Kentucky. It was so fascinating to me, I thought I'd like to go down to that part of the world. Got down there, didn't know it. I had a friend of a friend who had a store in Beckley. He said, if you want to learn about West Virginia, work in a coal mine. So they got me a job in the coal mine. I broke my finger the second day, but I continued and wrote an article for Harper's Magazine. I started writing for them. I covered the war in Bangladesh, spent 6 weeks in Bangladesh, and won an award for the Overseas Press Club for that. And then I started writing a series of books. I wrote Playing for Keeps in Washington, about the most powerful people in Washington. I went on and wrote this trilogy on the Kennedys, Kennedy women, the Kennedy men, Sons of Camelot. Before that, I wrote, let's see how much time here I'm doing my time here. 10 minutes. I've got 10 minutes? I've used 10 minutes?
No, you've got about 10 left. I got to
Okay,
spend 2 giving you.
Okay, so I'll tell you one story. When I needed to have a bestseller. I wasn't, my books, my agent said you got to have a bestseller. So I decided to write a book about Johnny Carson. I figured that was bestseller territory. And the advice would be to celebrities is be good to your exes. Because Johnny Carson wasn't, and his 3 ex-wives talked to me and I wrote a fairly devastating book on him. One of them was Joanne Carson was the second wife. Joanne Carson, they lived in the UN Plaza in New York when Carson was doing the show out of there. And Joanne became friendly with Truman Capote. When they moved west, Truman, they were divorced, but Joanne came west then to be close to Johnny. And Truman Capote, whenever he was drunk on drugs, would come out and he had a little suite of rooms next to her kitchen where he'd stay. And he died in her arms one night. And Joanne called me one day and said that before he died, Truman had done a tape for her telling how she could do the 80s counterpart of the 60s black and white ball at the Plaza Hotel, the greatest party of the 60s. And Joan said, it's going to be the most incredible party, but you can't come. And the reason I couldn't come is because her alimony was $75,000 a year. If she said anything negative about Johnny, she would lose her alimony. So I couldn't. Well, the last day she called and said, you can come. Well, I should know what last-minute invitations mean, right? Is that they need to fill the tables. And she said, you have to come, you have to wear a costume. So I went to the costume store, and the only costume left was the executioner. But some people, knowing my writing, think it's probably appropriate. But I got the executioner. My wife here, Vesna, just got a pretty mask, and we went up there. Well, she invited every star in Hollywood. And People magazine was in, a big feature on her dream in life was being in People magazine. But none of the stars had shown up because they wouldn't dare be there, because if they were there, Johnny didn't like them, they wouldn't get the Tonight Show. So we come up in this van that brings us up there. Like 40 photographers come, they want me. They think I'm a great star. And of course I can't take up that. We go in, there's really no star. It's kind of pathetic how few people are there. At midnight you're supposed to take off your mask. And of course we can't take off, we leave right before midnight. And then about a half hour later, Joanne comes screaming into the living room. There's been a theft. Somebody's gone into Truman's rooms, they've stolen his ashes, they've stolen her jewelries, they've stolen his last manuscript. And who could it be? The executioner had disappeared so mysteriously. That was the thing. And next week there was a story in People magazine about the theft. A few days later, Joanne called me and said the ashes had been found. Of course, I know that she had stolen them herself. She wanted someone over to help her. We got in her car. Well, point of fact, it was only half of the ashes. The other half of the ashes was Truman's lover in New York had it. So we had half of the ashes. What were we going to do with them? I knew in Westwood there was this facility where Marilyn Monroe's ashes were. I said, why don't we go there, Joanne? So we went there, we went around, and finally there were mailboxes, there were books, and she said he couldn't be booking us with other people with true books. So we saw these mausoleums, these big, like 25 of them, these big slabs. And one of them had Peter Lawford's name on it. And they said, Peter Lawford, the Kennedys have not paid for this. We're going to cut you a special deal, and we're going to take Peter out of there, and we're going to put Truman in. Well, she agreed with this, but she couldn't agree to part with the whole 50%. So she poured half of those into another vase and put 25% of Truman into that mausoleum, along with 100% of her cat. So if you ever go to Westwood, that's what you're going to see. So that was just one of my many adventures as a writer. And I struggled to build the truth out of the truth, to work very hard to get individual facts right, and to take the story wherever it leads me. Sometimes it leads me to places I don't like it to go, I say things I don't want to say, but that's the obligation, and that's the greatness of American freedom. And the abuse of American freedom is not to do that, and I think so often now we find people doing that. We find people not adhering to that, being so partisan one way or the other. In a democracy, the people are there to make the decisions. All you have to do is give people the facts. Give the people, let the people figure it out. And in my books, I try to lay things out there. I wrote a book, The Lynching, about the last lynching of America in 1981, Michael Donnelly in Mobile, Alabama. That was about Morris Dees. Morris Dees was now a figure of great controversy. I knew a lot of that. I saw a lot of that happening with him when I was down there doing my book. I remember we'd have these parties at his house, and there were no African Americans. And I said to Morris, why is this so? Yes, there were black waiters, but why you? It's the Southern Poverty Law Center, and I'm sure a lot of you give money to the Southern Poverty Law Center, right? But he said, well, the blacks, they don't want to come to my parties because they think they're tokens. Well, I don't think they tried hard enough. And when you went into that building, because I spent many months there, you saw no minorities in leadership positions. There was a very deferential attitude, an old South attitude, much of it. It was so much that they did great things, but they have $450 million sitting there, and they're still sending out these fund letters telling you they need your bucks to do good. And I say, don't send them money. I say they have plenty of money. You want to send it to Antioch and the other place, but no longer the Southern Poverty Law does that. I'm sorry, but that's just the way I think about it. And Morris is a brilliant fundraiser, and he figures that these things coming out of the South, the evil South, we're going to raise money for that. But that's what that has become. And that's another example of trying to look inside and see the truth. My book on Donald Trump. My brother's a professor at UCLA. He says it's not negative enough. Well, I think it's a devastating book, but I'm letting the reader figure this out for himself. I don't want to lecture people. I don't like to be lectured to, and I don't like people to lecture on my books. So that's kind of what I do. In Antioch, I don't know last night I met somebody at dinner, I won't mention his name, he graduated from 60 class to 65, and yet, I couldn't have gone anyplace else. I wouldn't have survived anyplace else. And, I kind of think that was true for me. I mean, I had to figure my own way. When I look back on those years, I remember with awe Stephen Jay Gould. Not his genius, but the fact that he got it. He used his every moment. If it had to do something with politics, he was involved. It was singing, he was there. If it was the newspaper, whatever it was, that guy was there. He figured Antioch out to get it. I wish I figured it out. It took me all those years to get focused, But Antioch gave me the space where I could learn that and figure myself out. It was a great experience. And talking to so many of you here, we all totally understand that. We all understand that. Wherever we meet, we have that bond. It's a magnificent thing. And I'm really honored to be here today. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Huh?
Did you bring any autograph books of Largo with you?
I didn't. I should have. I didn't bring the books.
I'll show you this one.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Larry, thank you very much for coming. I thank your wife for encouraging you to do so. I heard about that. And we'd like to present you with the plaque. This will suffice for the Rebecca Rice Award. It is quite colorful, quite beautiful. It's made by Beth Holyoke. She lives in Yellow Springs. She's an artist. She works in ceramics, drawing, and mixed media. She also volunteers with youth in arts and in swimming. Her work has been shown in various places, including Dayton Visual Arts Center and Norwood College, right over the border there. So,
Thank you very much.
well, there's some bubble wrap. So on the way back.
We need a whole picture.
Hi everyone, I'm Barbara Espen, class of 1975, and I was delighted when the Alumni Board asked me to present the J.D. Dawson Award for support and service to the college to Dr. Robert S. Fogarty, otherwise known as Bob, the distinguished longtime editor of the Antioch Review. The J.D. Dawson Award recognizes significant contributions to Antioch College by alumni or friends of Antioch. It is given to persons who have contributed in a significant way to Antioch College or a program of Antioch College. Perhaps best known for his involvement with the co-op department, J.D. Dawson's entire career was dedicated to Antioch. And I think it's safe to say that the majority of Bob Fogarty's career has similarly been committed to Antioch College and the greater college community. This began in 1968 as an assistant professor of history, continues now. He holds the John Dewey Professor Emeritus in the Humanities, and it features over 4 decades as editor of the Antioch Review, one of the longest continually published literary journals in the United States. Now, regretfully, I did not study with Bob during my Antioch years. I met him more recently during one of my visits to campus during the closure years, when the Alumni Board was, among other things, assisting in the design of the curriculum for the new Antioch College. I think we each felt an immediate affinity. This was aided by our mutual esteem for John Ronshine, Antioch Professor of Music Emeritus. Very, very dry martinis, no ice. And our belief in the centrality of the study of the humanities at a liberal arts institution. Over the years, I've gotten to know Bob a bit better, and his wife, Catherine, and I have marveled at his ability to effortlessly weave references to intellectual and cultural history, literature, social movements, astute personal observations, all in answer maybe to a single question. So Antioch College has long pointed to its affiliated institutions like WISO, the Coretta Scott King Center, and the Antioch Review in its efforts to attract students and financial support. By keeping the Antioch Review in the forefront of its field since 1977, Bob has added immeasurably to the fame and reputation of Antioch College in the larger academic and literary community. He's mentored countless students and instilled in them a deep love of history, literature, poetry, and the arts, as well as a deep understanding of the human condition. Bob has also overseen many co-op students at the Review, providing insights into both great writing and the business of running a literary review. But most of all, Bob sets a standard for the Antioch community by fiercely defending freedom of speech and thought, and adhering staunchly to the view that the best antidote for disfavored speech is more speech. So in preparation for making these introductory remarks, I looked through some random correspondence that we've had that I printed out and put in my Fogarty folder. I am a paper person. Over the years, and I came upon something I hope Bob does not mind my sharing. So first, some context. It was 2010. The college trustees were looking for a new president. Bob's name had been put forward, and he was explaining to me why he did not want to take it on. Bob wrote, "I am proud of the Antioch Review, of the very fine students who attended and prospered in part because of Antioch. I hope they find a solid president, that a pot of gold is unearthed on the campus, and that a distinguished faculty is hired." Well, I think Bob has long been the pot of gold on the campus, and that the Antioch adventure continues today in large part due to the dedication and hard work of Bob Fogarty. So I will be proud to present his J.D. Dawson Award, and I'm pleased to turn the podium over to Bob so that we can hear from him directly.
My remarks are going to be slightly different than Larry's.
Bob, you got to turn them.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm pre-Euclidean, I'm sorry. I'd like to begin with a disclaimer. I always do this when I'm going to give a talk of some kind, and I'll utter the most terrifying words that you can hear from the mouth of an academic. I will be brief. The second has to do with how I wound up here, which is a rather circuitous route. My first job was teaching at Michigan State University. I taught in a communications department, actually, and it had been a rhetoric department. I taught, and then I was fired, rather publicly, actually. 3 of us were fired at the same time, and there were protests, and the protests consisted of the following. Buildings were seized, petitions went, the American Civil Liberties Union got involved in it, the state legislature got involved in it, and I thought it would turn out well. first lesson, actually, in the academic world, as I thought it would turn out well. It had, however, a very bad ending. I guess by maybe July, June, I discovered that I was going to be fired, and that it was going to stink. So I thought, well, I'm going to leave the country. And I did. I left the country, and I went in a rather meandering way to Greece. And I lived in Greece for a full year. I drank Retsina. There was one bookshop in the island that I was on, Rhodes, and they had, I would buy books. I'd buy the biggest book I could find. Because it was cheaper, and so I read a great deal. I read all the Russians, which was a wonderful experience. And I liked it, and I ran it. My son read that with me, but it dawned on me something like 6 months later that I needed a job. I was in Greece, and I was in a wonderful town called Lindos, which some of you may have been to. It has an acropolis. It has a 6th century Byzantine church, and it's quite wonderful, actually. So I read the Chronicle of Higher Education, and it was an ad for a job, and I was to be Louis Filler's replacement. I know. But it was a one-year appointment. At one point, Louis was a difficult person by anybody's stretch of the imagination. He gave me some advice when I arrived. And he said that there are two kinds of faculty at Antioch. There are the swingers and the creeps. And he said, you're a creep. And that meant, of course, that I was not on the flying edge of any educational innovation, forging new definitions of what Antioch would be. He said, you're going to write books. And I said, that's good. And when I arrived at Antioch, there were some major figures, fortunately, still very, very active. Among them would be George Geiger, who was a quite hospitable and remarkable teacher by anybody's standard. Paul Bixler, who was the head of the library, and equally good. Paul was not a great speaker, but he had a very fluid writing style. He was almost incapable of speaking in some ways. But they were there, and they represented something about the college. They represented their longevity, and I was very fortunate to come when they were still very active. They had been here for a long time, and it included actually people like Nolan Miller. And Nolan was an enthusiast. That's the best way. As some of you knew then, Nolan was a closeted gay man. Not terribly closeted, however. Everyone knew that Nolan was gay, and he would come in to a class, and he would say, I want to be loved. He meant it quite literally, actually. Among his students was, of course, the distinguished poet Mark Strand, others, Rod Serling, all of whom became rather significant figures. So that was a wonderful thing to happen. They were part of a past, and they were very self-confident individuals. There were other faculty members who were around. It was also a period, when I came in 1968, the college was in transition. It had abandoned grades completely, and there were very active organizations, including one called ISSP, which was modestly called that, and it was interpreted to be the Institute for the Solution of Social Problems. not the Institute for Studying Social Problems. And I thought it was slightly grandiose. Others thought differently, of course. And I wound up in the history department, which was a very good department. You had a lot of very good people in the department. And the college had eccentrics. And by eccentrics, I mean someone who didn't quite fit into the mode. Among them, the most prominent one, was John Ronshine, who was a genuine eccentric. He was the real thing. And I can remember having conversations with John. He was he was a great teacher. He was an expert on wine and food, et cetera, but he was a difficult man to get away from. Namely, that he would begin talking, and at some point I would say, John, I have to go away. I'm busy, et cetera, and I would take a step backwards, and he would take a step forward. And I eventually called it the Ronshine Gavat. But it was great to know him personally because he knew enormous about this. And then, in some ways, the most important thing was that the students were first rate. They were really interesting. They had ideas of their own. And when I came, I was teaching all of the courses that Louis taught, including a literature course. And so I went to see Bob Maurer, who was then the head of the English department, and I said, what do you want me to teach? And he said to me, oh, what would you like to teach? And I thought, that's really terrific, actually. And so I suggested a course that I wanted to teach. And the course was to be called Second-Rate Literature. And I was very interested in that because it was to be a course about aesthetics. I wanted to know how you told the difference between second rate and first rate. And many of the students who took it remembered it as an odd and interesting course. And there were various the students were first rate. There was one incident, and I'll tell it. At one point I was lecturing in a class. I taught a class on urban history and suburban history and things like that. And I had a student come into my classroom, and the student was in the middle of a full-blown breakdown. He was in serious trouble, and he came into the classroom and began to imitate me. At that point, I turned to the class, and a lot of them had been reading Goffman, and I was slightly terrified that they would feel sympathetic as a result of what they had read about Irving by Goffman. And so I turned to the class, and I was fearful that and I said, would you like him to stay or go? And in unison, they said, we'd like him to leave. And I was relieved. He, however, was not as crazy as it seemed. He then asked for a secret ballot. However, the students, at least one is here, I know, Lester Lee, and Lester over there, and what Lester and I have in common is that our birthday is the same day. So and Lester he replaced me one time when I had a fellowship and was going off, and he taught here for 3 years, very, very successfully, actually. The other thing I'd have to say was that it was an honor in many ways to receive this award, partly because of the distinguished alumni that the college had, a quite remarkable body of people, and it was enjoyable, to meet them, because they were talented, they had made accomplishments. I'll just give you a couple of people who probably should be known better than they are. Ted Levitt. How many people know who Ted Levitt is? A few, yeah. Ted Levitt was a marketing genius of the first order. He was the advisor advisor to Saatchi & Saatchi on its advertising policy, and if you gave him a question, he would be able to answer it almost immediately. He was enormously practical minded, and at one point, the college owned the Little Art Theater downtown. The then person who was running it said he had a problem, and Ted said, "What?" And he said, "Well, I put a popcorn machine in the Little Art, and they don't like it because it's associated with the malls." And he said, "What they want is organic cookies and chamomile tea." And Ted said, "Forget about them. Don't pay any attention to them. If they want to see a German language movie, that's it. It's the only one, and they'll come back. Don't worry about them." He said, "But however, what you have to do, why did you in fact put the popcorn machine in?" He said, "Well, to make money." And Ted said, "Of course." And he then said, "What you have to do is to give your staff gum." And I looked at him rather blankly, and he said, "Your staff will eat your profits. You cannot chew gum and eat popcorn at the same time." And so I thought, I've never experienced that high level of intelligence, which was, it was remarkable actually. And he was able to do that, and later became a supporter of the Antioch Review. Or Cynthia Fuchs Epstein, who some of you may know, who is at the Graduate Center in New York. She's just retired. And so I feel that my time here has been valuable for me personally, and that I've had a lot of luck. And this is from Machiavelli. Machiavelli says that the prince can only be successful if he has what Machiavelli called fortuna. And fortuna is luck. And if you don't have luck, you're probably not going to succeed as a prince. It was very, very good advice. And so I think that I've been lucky in that I've come to enjoy Yellow Springs. I grew up in Brooklyn, where I left Brooklyn because there was no reason to stay. And it's now the third most expensive city in America. I thought, how was that possible? And so I found that my time here has been enriching for me in many ways, and also for my wife, Catherine Cade. She's an artist. And so I've come to like it. I've been printing in the review over time the senior papers of many of the distinguished graduates of the college. And they're quite interesting. They're interesting in the sense that on the one hand, the first part of the paper is that they want to say what do they want to do. The second part of the paper is a critique of Antioch. They vary. Like I have one now that's quite interesting, right? An artist, Emma Amos, actually. She's a terrific writer and printmaker in New York. But there's criticism of the college. I'll give you another example, as some of you may know. The college graduated the major translator for Borges, Norman Thomas DiGiovanni, who was, after time in the Argentine, came back to Antioch, and he had a complaint about the college. His complaint was that the college did not teach Latin or Greek. He was a writer. He appreciated at that time what he was missing because he was interested in language. And so I'm particularly honored by the alums for choosing me to win this award. And among other students, for example, is Larry Foster, who aside from being a folk dancer, is the second non-Mormon to head up the Mormon Historical Society. And the third, right? Mario Felix and somebody else. which is a considerable accomplishment for someone who is not, as far as I know, a Mormon. Not till, et cetera, but what are you doing? So I wanted to give a sense of how I wound up here, and when people ask me how I'm doing, I say I'm ambulatory, and that's sufficient. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll.
Can't go away yet. Here is your J.D. Dawson Award, and this was by Deb Polio.
Oh, yes.
Ceramic artist living in Yellow Springs, Ohio.
Tom.
And she's been working in ceramics, drawing, and mixed media for 30 years.
Yeah.
As an artist and community member, she volunteered in both arts and swimming programs, both at home in Yellow Springs and in Greece. Volunteering with refugee children in arts activities and swimming lessons in 2016, 2017, and 2018. Beth has had numerous local and regional exhibitions of her clay work and drawings and paper making. And among her exhibits, her work has been shown at the Dayton Visual Arts Center and Earlham College.
And her father was Tom Polio.
So congratulations.
Thanks very much.
And enjoy your work.
Questions? What you covered thoroughly.
There's a question here.
There's a question.
Microphone?
Yes, go ahead. Where?
Here.
Yeah.
Hi, Bob. When and how did you get started as editor of the review?
It was an accident. And by an accident, I mean that I had been involved in starting a literary magazine when I was at Michigan State, and I got fired. So when I came here, the review was functioning, more than functioning, and I had an interest in helping to sustain it in one way or another. The then editor, I'll tell this, it's, it's not well known actually, but the then editor was Larry Brown, and Laurence Brown was, again, a difficult person, but he was actually a quite good editor, and we were friends. He, however, had some faults. One of them was that he didn't name, he had a child, and he couldn't bring himself to name the child, and the child had not been named for 6 months. And I said, Larry, I don't think that's a good thing. You know, the kid, what do you call a kid? And it might be a good idea. He later decided, it was when the college was going to pull the subsidies for the review, which has never been terribly great, actually. And Larry took out what he said was a blind ad in the New York Review of Books. It said the following. It said, for sale, lease, or lend. Assets, long history of publication, distinguished writers that appeared in it. Second thing he mentioned was associated with a failing college. I can remember, since many of the people who were on the review board, most of the people in the history department, Hannah Goldberg at one point, Frank Long, and so we called him in. Larry was a good editor, but he showed up at a meeting in the main building in his Porsche, came in his bathrobe actually, and he came up, and we asked him had he placed the ad. He lied to us. I then we went to Jim Dixon, and Jim said, well, I'm going to fire him. And we said, good. But Larry was a difficult person, but an interesting one. And last year, we received a check for $25,000 from Grauman Trust. He had died, and I don't know whether or not he was trying to make amends, but he had the good sense to send us through the agent a substantial check for the magazine, and we are grateful to him, whether out of guilt or I have no idea because I didn't see him after that. I didn't know that. Any other questions?
And what year was that?
I'm sorry.
What year was that?
Oh, yeah, all right, let me think.
What year was it?
But yeah, no.
That you became editor?
It must have been about maybe 15 years ago. I think it was probably about that time.
Just that long,
Yeah, yeah.
longer than that.
Well, when did you become editor?
I became the editor in 1977, and we've continued to be a somewhat old-fashioned magazine in that we publish not just literary material, but we publish social commentary, we publish a lot of different things that the average literary magazine does not carry, and we publish authors old and new, where Robert Conard is here, and we've published the early correspondence of Heinrich Boll. Boll is not well known in this country, and by exposing him, we're doing something for he's well known in Europe, and won the Nobel Prize, and should be better known. So we receive a variety of material, and we're interested in furthering good writing. I got a call a couple of weeks ago from Poets and Writers, which is an important journal, and they had wanted to know if we would accept stories or anything electronically. And I said, are you crazy? We would be swamped. We would be out of business. We could not stand the volume of material that would be submitted to us. And I think, as the brochure indicates, we get a lot of it. We publish about 1/4% of all of the submissions we receive. We would not be able to do that if we wanted to accept electronic submissions. So that world is there, and we continue to get good writing by good people. Yeah. Way in the back.
Hi there. I had the good fortune of taking a class with you. Wait a second. Wait for the mic. I gotta earn my keep.
Hi, thanks for your comments. I had the good fortune of being one of your students when I was here. And you did actually bust me for my bad writing, I might mention. It turns out I was the only one that anyone's ever heard of getting a writing check, which means I had to work off I had to do remediation. So thank you for that, actually, sincerely. But my question was, when and how did you become interested in utopian communities?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was lucky in that when I was an undergraduate, I had a teacher, a man by the name of Bob Remini, who has written all of the major big biographies, Clay, Webster, etc. 2 volumes on Andrew Jackson, etc. And he was a terrific teacher. And it was partly through his influence I did a paper as an undergraduate, actually, on a utopian community. I was very interested in it. Not quite, well, I do know. There are examples of the small community, and they had both influence, and I came here, where at a certain level, the word community was, to say the least, overused. So that students in their first year were bombarded with the notion of community. By the time they got to their 4th or 5th year, they did not wish to hear that word ever again. And in some ways, the question of community is of interest. And I also specialized. I've done 2 books specifically on a community in upstate New York, the Oneida community, which many of you know, of course, as a community that is given as a gift on marriage. It started out as a free love community, which most people don't know about, and they the very odd sexual practices. And whenever I would give a talk, I taught courses on it, I would start to talk about the sexual practices that they used in the community. And the Antioch students, who usually acted as if they were very, very sophisticated about this matter, but when I started talking about it, they stopped saying anything. The sexual technique was a successful birth control technique, technically called coitus reservatus, otherwise known as reserved embrace, a whole bunch of things, and the only context that people, in fact, know about it usually is through Zen Buddhism, one form or another. But I found it just remarkable because it was a birth control system. It worked. Do you want to know how it worked?
They didn't teach Latin.
It teaches Latin. Yeah, no. The technique is when men and women have sexual relations, the man does not have an orgasm. It was a successful birth control technique, and the women avoided men, this is crude, I know, women avoided men who in the community were called leakers. It worked. It had also the only eugenics experiment ever tried in America. And eventually, the descendants became the owners of the community at Oneida, and I'm still on the board, actually, of the Historical Society of the Oneida community. And they had their other great consideration is that they operated the first golf course, which you can go play at, of a corporation. And so I hope the college does not buy a golf course. It's an enormous burden and something that no one would want to have around their neck.
They have a solar array instead.
Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you very much.